Riven is one of my favorite games of all time. Last year I made a video talking about why it's so good, so if you haven't seen that, go check it out. And a couple years ago I was reading about Riven when I stumbled across the work of the Starry Expanse project. Starry Expanse was a fan-driven project to remaster Riven. Myst had gotten this Real Myst remaster which lets you play through it in real-time 3D, and the goal was to do the same thing for Riven. The Starry Expanse team had been quietly rebuilding Riven from the ground up since about 2009, and in 2022, Cyan Worlds, the original developer of Riven, announced that they were actually taking over the project. So after more than 10 years of development, the remake is finally available. Is it any good? That's what we're going to talk about today. You ever have a dream where you're like in a familiar place, but everything is kind of moved around a little bit? Like sometimes I'll have a dream where like I'm in my apartment, but the sink is in the fucking living room or something. That's kind of how it feels to play this remake. I've played Riven like once a year for the past decade basically, so at this point I am intimately familiar with the layout and the mechanics of this game. But this game is almost like winking at longtime fans, trying to tell you, this isn't gonna be how you remember it. So I get to Riven, I'm looking around, I'm exploring, I get to this lever. I'm like, oh, I remember this. This is the lever where if you pull it, it's gonna redirect the steam power. And what that's gonna do is, it's gonna take the catwalk from Crater Island, it's gonna make it into stairs so you can reach the, oh shit. Well, and admittedly this doesn't really have that big of an impact on the gameplay, but this is the game telling you this is not just a shot-for-shot remake, this is an entirely new game. And this kind of keeps happening. Sometimes it's little details that are out of place, like, oh, they moved Ghen's throne room, or, oh, there's some, drawbridges in the village that weren't there before. And then you walk into one of these golden domes, which used to basically just be like hiding spots for Ghen's linking books, and, excuse me? Very cool reveal that these domes are actually now airlocks, essentially, containing the breaches in the fabric of Riven's reality. This was an especially crazy reveal because I thought I was so clever. I know what symbols go to these islands. I remember that, so I put in the symbol of this telescope, walk into the dome, and they completely flipped the script on me. That was a very cool reveal. It seems like everybody in the fan base who's played this part is like really kind of floored by this reveal. And like, me too, I like it. I think it's good, but I kind of have some thoughts about this. From a gameplay perspective, I like that the domes act as a shortcut between the islands. I also like the way that this change sort of changes up the mechanics of the fire marble puzzle, which we're gonna talk about later. But I also think that using the star fissure like this really diminishes its mystery and intrigue within the story. The star fissure is something that nobody in this game understands. Atris doesn't understand what it is. Catherine doesn't understand what it is. Gehn doesn't understand what it is. In the original, the Star Fissure is both this incredibly destructive force that can tear Riven apart, but also this natural and benevolent part of the fabric of Riven's reality. The entire point of Riven is exploring the unknown, and throughout this game, no matter how much knowledge you uncover about the age itself, or the islands, or the mechanisms that Gehn has put there, the Star Fissure remains a total mystery. And the last thing this game does is throw you headfirst into one last mystery. All those mysteries on Riven that you spend all this time unpacking and understanding are just tiny specks in a much larger, much more mystifying existence. That final sequence of falling into the fissure and looking up as Riven becomes just a smaller and smaller speck in a sea full of stars, it's just the perfect ending to a game with such a lonely and mysterious tone. And I think spending so much time inside the fissure in the remake is kind of desensitizing almost. Like you kind of get used to just being in there and it makes the ending not hit quite as hard. Overall, I think the fissure as a shortcut is great for the flow of gameplay, but at the expense of diminishing a really unique and interesting aspect of the story. I am going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the things that I actually did like from this remake, but the domes also illustrated another part of this that I didn't really love. I don't know why, but this remake feels like it is trying very hard to avoid using buttons, and it makes a lot of points in this game feel like trying to use an automatic sync with a broken sensor. Like in the original, to exit these domes, you hit a button and then the domes open. In the remake, you walk up from the fissure, the door closes behind you, you stand there for about 10 seconds, you're just kind of waiting around, the textures get all shitty, and then finally the dome opens up. I think the reason this bothered me so much is because it kind of messes up the sense of cause and effect to your actions, and it really diminishes like the mechanical reality of the world. Like to me, a hugely interesting part of this lore is that Gehn has been trapped on Riven for 30 years. Atreus and Catherine trapped him there with the intent that he not escape before he dies. And Gehn has spent the last 30 years basically harnessing the entire Rivenese civilization to facilitate his escape plan. Everything that he's built, every machine that you see on Riven, is a result of Gehn basically enslaving the people of Riven to build shit for him. His resources are extremely limited, and there are parts of his journals where he says that he is not even 100% sure that it is possible to escape given the limited resources that he has. The entire back half of his life has been dedicated to MacGyvering his way off this island, and you're telling me this dude went out of his way to invent automatic doors? Buttons are good. Buttons give you a very clear sense of cause and effect. Oh, I hit a button and then a thing happened. Now I understand how this mechanism works. I still don't understand what causes these new domes to stop spinning and open again. I've tried shuffling around in every combination of foot movements I possibly can, and it kind of seems like they just kind of go when they feel like it. Alright, enough about all that. Let's talk about the puzzles. The thing about Riven is there are really only like 3 or 4 main puzzles, and all of them are hard as shit. When you've played this game as many times as I have, you kind of forget that this is a game that is notorious for frustrating people, but I think the remake actually does a really good job of reducing a lot of the frustration from these puzzles in a still challenging and fair way. Starting with the submarine puzzle, if you can even call it that, it's not really a puzzle, but navigating around the village in this stupid submarine was one of the most infuriating parts of the original game. You have all these controls and there's no way of knowing where you are without stopping and opening the lid of the submarine, and half the time you stop somewhere thinking you're where you're supposed to be, and then you can't even open the lid because you're not to the dock yet. Oh, you made it to a place where you can open the lid? Well, did you remember to extend all the docks first? No? Tough luck, idiot. Go back and do the whole thing all over again. The remake pretty much just skips all that. Now you just point the lever to where you want to go and you go there, which is a lot better. There was an extremely irritating moment while I was using this submarine, and I'm not sure if it was a glitch or if it was intentional. At one point during the Moi Statue Puzzle, which we're going to talk about in a second, there's this like heat-related water puzzle, which I actually like because it plays with an aspect of the lore that was really only tangentially addressed in the original. So Gehn mentions that the water on Riven has these microbes that react to heat by essentially like retreating and forming shapes in the water, and he uses this property of the water to do a lot of things. That's how you get the bubble viewer on Survey Island. That's how these rings of fire keep the water away from the minecart track. But aside from a cool little world building detail, in the original that never got implemented into a puzzle, and the remake found a way to implement it into the Moi Statue Puzzle. You shut this like heat vent in the village and it creates this pocket of heat next to the water, which causes the microbes to retreat, which creates a little space that you can walk through. And while I didn't love that you have to have the submarine there first to trigger the automatic heated plate to make enough space to actually get to where you're going, that was not the annoying part of this. No, the annoying part comes from another fucking automatic door. So you go through this door that's been revealed by like the heat pushing the water away, and then the door closes behind you and you hear the automatic heating plate turn off, which doesn't really make sense on its face because the submarine has been gone for a long time, and I don't think your presence is what was triggering that plate. Otherwise, why would you have to bring the submarine there first? In any case, the water like comes rushing back in basically to the door, and I just accidentally did like a half turn back around, and then the fucking automatic door opened again, let the entire ocean in, and I died. At no other point in this game can you make a move that will kill you. Like, there are so many ledges in this game that the game doesn't let you walk off of, but for some reason this automatic door just opens and an entire tidal wave comes in and kills you. And for some reason when this happens, it resets the entire puzzle, so now you have to go get the submarine and do the whole thing over again. This seems overlooked almost. Like, I feel like this cannot be intentional on the part of the developers, so I'm gonna say maybe that was just an oversight. With that one frustrating bit aside, with the submarine they very much took something that was a complete pain in the ass in the original and they turned it into a very useful and easy way to navigate around the village, and they ended up throwing in some interesting little navigational puzzles in there as well. I'd say the submarine is a huge upgrade over the original. The Dunny number puzzle, I think they did a great job of balancing this one. The original is kind of brutal. On its face, it seems like a very simple translation exercise, like just figure out which symbols correspond with which numbers, but good luck with that. The thing is, it's not illogical. Once you understand how the higher numbers are formed by rotating the symbols for 1 through 5 to get multiples of 5, then it makes sense. And they do give you a couple of clues to work with how 5 is a rotated 1 and 10 is a rotated 2, but expecting you to extrapolate the rest of that pattern based only on that is a little bit rough. To be clear, I love the ingenuity of the number system, and I respect the developers for expecting their audience to just figure that out, but yeah, that's a little brutal. They found a really clever way to make this a little little bit easier in the remake. Now, instead of you needing to know the numbers from 1 through 25, they do this thing where all you need to know is the base value for the fire marbles, which is like a number between 1 and 10, and then these modifying values based on color, and in my playthrough, those only went up through 14. So in the original, you had to understand 2 principles to complete the puzzle. You had to understand that combined symbols are the sum of the components, essentially, and that rotated symbols are the original symbols multiplied by 5. The remake makes it so that you only need the combination principle, not the rotation principle, and that one is a lot easier to understand. And I think they make up for the difficulty loss in this puzzle by adding in the entirely new Rivenese number system, which requires you to sort of extrapolate patterns in the same way that the original number system did. Okay, let's talk about the one that lives in infamy, the fire marble puzzle. Go find any community posts about the original Riven and you will find 19 comments with people confused and angry at the fire marble puzzle. This puzzle is like you came home and a mad scientist opened your door and said, "Welcome back. I ripped up your birth certificate and the title to your house and scattered the pieces across the 7 seas. Here's a plane ticket. Good luck." This puzzle is brokenly hard, but I love it. It is very much the final boss of Riven. Once you beat this puzzle, the only ones after it are really just like pretty simple put in the password style interactions. It requires you to pull together so much information from so many different sources. To solve this puzzle, first you have to go to each dome to figure out which symbol matches up with each island. Then you have to go to the workroom and match each symbol to a color. Then you gotta go find the survey equipment and figure out which square each dome is in based on the topography of each island. And then you gotta put all that information together up on the big dome back on the Temple Island. I'm never gonna say this is a fair difficulty puzzle, but I love the way that it works. By contrast, I think the remake actually makes it a fair difficulty. First, I love that they took the grid down from 25 by 25 to just 5 by 5. It makes it a lot more clear which square everything is supposed to go in, because now you just get to use the square straight off of the bubble viewer, and then they just took out the detail viewer from the original, which makes it a lot more approachable, I feel. I also like the way that they just give you the 5 colors that you're supposed to use instead of giving you 6 and then expecting you to figure out which 5 to use, and that always kind of pissed me off in the original because literally the only way to know which color to use for Prison Island is to guess. You just have to take a 50-50 guess, because the only way of knowing what colors match up to each island is you have to know what symbol is on each dome on each island, but you don't even get to visit Prison Island until after you solve the fire marble puzzle. So literally the only way to solve this puzzle is to guess which color is correct for Prison Island, and that never made sense to me in a game that is, first of all, hugely thematically related to the number 5, and also prides itself, it seems, on being very logical, but then requires you to take a random guess to solve the biggest puzzle in the game. In the remake, not only do they give you the colors you're working with, but they also let you visit Prison Island early, so you get a verification of the symbol. I think it takes this puzzle down from like brokenly difficult in the original to like reasonably hard. Alright, I saved the Moi Statue Puzzle for last because it's the one I have the most mixed feelings about. Let's start with what the remake does right. First, I think it's really neat the way that they use the totems to emphasize the rebelliousness of the moiety against Gehn. Like their code is expressed in Rivenese numbers, despite the fact that Gehn is trying to push the Dunny numerology and culture on all of Riven's people. Gehn builds a prison on an island that is literally miles away from all the other islands, with the only way of accessing it being to go through the domes and walk through the fabric of space and time itself. And the Moi, they're like, yeah, let's put a statue there. I also like that the outlines of the animals near each statue are an exact match for the inputs on the stones in the puzzle, and I think this screenshot feature is also an extremely useful tool here, because in the original, figuring out which stones correspond to the vague outlines near each of the Dunny number balls was kind of hard, and it would be really frustrating to actually solve this puzzle, understand the mechanics, and then get the wrong answer just because you can't tell which outline corresponds to which stone. So in a lot of ways, the remake really improved this puzzle. But in the original, part of the puzzle was the sounds that the animals made, and the remake just removes that part entirely. The first time I played Riven, I was extremely young and I was basically just watching my dad play it, so I don't have a super clear memory of that first playthrough, but whereas I have like no memory of solving the fire marble puzzle that first time, I have a very vivid memory of what it felt like to finally piece together the original Moi Statue Puzzle. You get to the village island for the first time and you get out of the maglev and you see this like little ball, and you click it and it shows you a symbol and plays a sound, and you're like, okay. Eventually you come to realize that that symbol is a number. Pretty soon you find another ball in the village. Different sound, different number. And this time, there's a little faucet next to it that makes a very deliberate shape out of the water. It's like, okay, you're starting to absorb all these details. You make a couple more laps around the island, you find another ball by the sunners on these rocks. Another shape, another symbol, another sound. And you're like, okay. And I vividly remember walking up to the Yttrim trap on Crater Island, which I had left down on accident, and pulling it back up, opening it, seeing the Yttrim and hearing the noise and being like, wait a second, I've definitely heard that before. And once you make that connection, then it all starts to come together. You visit the Workroom and you're like, wait a second, I've definitely heard that before too. And pretty soon you realize, oh, it's all these animal sounds. I love that this game's world has animals that are just native to these islands and you're actually forced to pay attention to them to progress through this game. It's just so cool. So anyways, by now in the puzzle you have a lot of numbers and sounds, but there's a problem. One of these balls doesn't have a sound associated with it, the one on Gehn's desk, and that requires you to read the letter that's next to it and realize, okay, if I go look through the periscope in the lake, I'm gonna see something. Oh, it's an outline, and that helps you realize, okay, the outlines are part of it too, and now you've got enough information to solve the puzzle. And admittedly, even once you have the correct animals, figuring out which outline corresponds to which stone is a pain in the ass. It's way harder than it should be, and the remake absolutely does solve that problem, but I do feel like a huge part of this puzzle was lost by making the sounds totally irrelevant. So I'd say with some exceptions, the puzzles are actually a pretty good upgrade over the original. But I feel like the other thing about this remake besides just the revamped puzzles was the remastered graphics, and I gotta say, I think the old visuals are better by a long shot. For one thing, the lighting and textures in this remake make it look a lot more like video gamey than the original, but more noticeable, unfortunately, than the lighting are the character models. I don't know what happened, but a lot of these character portrayals are kind of ruined by these shitty ass character models. Yeah, in the original, all the characters were green screened in, but there's nothing wrong with being green screened. Maybe it's just my love and nostalgia for the original kind of pouring over the top here, but I'd say the original characters actually looked good. And the thing is, it'd be one thing if the models were just bad and that's it, but the models being bad ruins so many amazing moments in this game. This game is all about making you feel isolated and yet watched. There's all this surveillance going on, but you never see anyone. So when you do see someone, it has to be mysterious and a little bit unsettling. Specific example, when you come back to Temple Island from Jungle Island for the first time and you open this door, you see for a brief moment that Gehn's face is in the viewer. He is watching you. He sits there for a second, and then he just vanishes. The image is a little bit blurry and hard to make out, but it's clear that that is Gehn, and now you know, he knows that you're here. This moment is so creepy, and it's so perfectly representative of the tone that this game is trying to strike. Let's watch this happen in the remake. This looks bad. There's literally no other way to say it. This looks bad. And it completely ruins this moment because it's not unsettling. It's just not realistic enough to be unsettling. All I can do is be amused at this, not unsettled. Second example, when you link into Tay for the first time, you're standing there, you're looking around, you're getting your bearings, and then once you've looked around for a bit, the door opens, these rebels come in and they trank you and you black out. All you see of them is like the brief amount of time it takes for them to knock you out. Now let's watch this happen in the remake. My man leaps out of the doorway wearing a fucking onesie or something and just stands there with the goofiest expression on his face for 10 seconds before the trank hits. Again, any kind of gravitas this moment could have had was fucking obliterated by feety pajama guy over here. And perhaps the worst victim of this problem, the fucking opening cutscene. Dude. I am not exaggerating when I say that this opening cutscene is one of my favorite gaming moments of all time. This is legitimately the perfect opening for this game. The music is exactly, perfectly zeroed in on the tone that the game is trying to set from minute one. The way the music builds throughout Atreus' speech as he gives you this like bare bones skeleton of this impossible mission, and then says, oh yeah, by the way, if you manage to do all this right, Riven probably also has a way for you to get home. I cannot overstate how formative this cutscene was for me. The song that plays during this cutscene, Atreus' theme, has been in my Spotify Wrapped 3 times in the past 10 years. That's not really a flex, that's kind of embarrassing actually. And boy howdy did this remake fuck up this opening cutscene. Whiterun Guard Atreus gives you like the spark notes of his original speech, and then he just kind of pieces out and just leaves you to link into Riven yourself, and then you get there and Cho's face is doing whatever this is. Bro, they kept all the original voice lines, but they could not make his face look like he was saying any of those words. And honestly, because of that failure to live up to the tone of the original, I can't say that this remake was an adequate substitute for the original game. Yeah, the puzzles are designed in a much more approachable way. They fixed a few completely broken parts of a few puzzles. I would even go so far as to say blanketly that the puzzles are just better than the original. But what I've sort of come to realize is that the thing that made the original so fascinating to me wasn't the puzzles, it was the atmosphere. It was the way it made me feel. That's what I love about Riven, and that's what's missing from this remake. There's none of that sense of uneasiness. It can't recreate that loneliness. So with all that said, I want to end by answering 3 questions. Should you play the remake? Yes, absolutely. I mean, first of all, I think it's really cool that this started out as a fan-made project and got folded into the original developer's release lineup. It's super cool to see the Starry Expanse team credited in this game's credits. And the new puzzles are difficult in a more fair way, I would say. If you're a person who likes puzzle games, you should buy this game. $35 is a super fair price for the experience this game will give you, especially if you've never played Riven at all before. Is the remake better than the original? I want to say no, but honestly, it depends. If you liked the original for the puzzles, you might like this one more. But if you're like me and you liked the original for its world, story, and tone, then no, I can't say you're gonna like this one better. What is the optimal way to experience Riven? I think the conclusion that I've come to is that Riven needs at least 2 playthroughs to fully appreciate. You need to slam your head into the difficulty ceiling the first time, so that the second time, with a bit of familiarity with the puzzles, you can focus more on how it makes you feel. Honestly, I think the best way to do it would be to play the remake first. Indulge in the version of this game that's a little bit more hand-holdy with the puzzles, get familiar with the world and its fixtures and its layout. Beat the remake, wait like a year, and then go back and play this fucking game the way it was meant to be experienced, dripping with atmosphere. All of which is to say, I had some issues with this remake. I can't say that I loved it, but it got me thinking about Riven again, and honestly, at this point, I think I'm just happy for the excuse. Thanks for watching.